Hello, and welcome to our latest Human Givens Ask the Expert podcast. I'm Julia Wellstead, and I'm part of the Human Givens team. Our expert today is Sue Saunders, who has over 30 years' experience as a trainer, coach, and psychotherapist. Sue also has extensive experience in the corporate world, particularly in IT. Now, Sue is Educational Director for Human Givens College and teaches many of our courses, including the new course, Improving Relationships at Home, at Work, and in the Community, which is why we're thrilled to have her with us today to discuss what does a positive friendship look like. Hello, Sue, how are you?
I'm very well, Julia. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Now, this is obviously a subject that resonates with many people, and we've received lots of questions for this podcast. And I think the first two of our listeners' questions, how important is friendship to our being? And do we need to have friends to be able to thrive? Or is communication with the wider community enough? I think those two questions actually provide the opportunity for Sue, if you don't mind, to give a bit of background about the importance of connection and intimacy.
Absolutely. Okay. So if I begin to approach this from the point of our basic needs, we're all born extremely dependent. We're all completely vulnerable and dependent on a relationship to survive as babies. We come into this world, we're completely dependent on another human being in order to survive until we get to a point, probably within your teenage years, when you begin to break away from those original caregivers, that family. If we make an assumption that it's your family, you break away from the family and begin to develop strong, intimate bonds with other humans, and that's usually your peer group. And that's why the peer group becomes so important in teenage years, because of the fact that you've broken away from your family. So we're born with this need for connection, with this need for connection with at least one other human being, but also with a group or a community. So if you like, we're born with that need for intimacy with our initial caregiver, but also to belong to a group. So they're hugely interconnected, those two needs. And our own personal resilience as an individual is interwoven with the quality and of those connections, those friendships and communities to which we belong. And we see those two needs, with the need for intimacy and friendship and the need for belonging to community, is really essential. And it is, you're absolutely right, it is one of the things that bring people into therapy quite a lot, because those relationships or those communities are broken down in some way, or those friendships are having developed probably initially as a very positive thing in somebody's life, have in some way morphed into something negative that is really causing somebody difficulty, whether that's a community or whether it's an individual friendship. Because maintaining happy personal friendships and relationships, or even belonging to, holding a group as being a positive force in someone's life, is a very tricky thing. It's not straightforward. They can, neglect or stress or inattention can lead to relationships breaking down and conflict ensuing as a result, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely, Sue. Very, very well said. And I think that brings us actually nicely on to the next question, which is, what does a positive friendship look like? And how can you tell a positive from a negative friendship? But these are nominalizations. Perhaps first it'd be good to unpack what is a positive friendship, what does it look like, and a negative one.
Okay. Well, let's look at friendship first of all. The great philosopher Aristotle divided friendship into three different types of friendships, which I think is still a really useful way to actually look at a friendship. He came up with the idea that there were three levels. One type of friendship was utility. So whereby a friendship, it served a purpose. So you can imagine a situation where you have somebody else in your life because they, I don't know, they're a good sports person or a squash player or somebody, and so they become a friend because they meet that need to, they're useful to go and play squash with. But beyond that, they're not really very useful. Or, they might be somebody to go on holidays with because they're also a single person and you need a single person to go on holidays with. So that's one level of friendship. Another level of friendship could be that the two individuals have great, it's based on pleasure, what Aristotle calls pleasure. You have great fun and they provide entertainment for one another, but that's as much as it goes. You hang around with someone because you have lots of fun. The third kind of friendship that Aristotle spoke about is a very different type of friendship. It's based on what he calls goodness. And if we unpack that a bit, what he really means is it's based on a real respect for the integrity of the other person, their goodness, if you like. And again, I know that's a nominalization, but their level of integrity, their level of their character, what Aristotle would have called their character, that they're a good person, basically. So you develop a friendship with that person because you have this great admiration. Now, obviously, that level of friendship, whereby it's based on a deep respect for someone else, will probably be much more longer lasting than the other two, which is based on utility or just having fun with the other person. So friendships can fall into different kinds of categories. And friendships then, depending on what kind of category it falls into, you'll have different expectations of the other person. And your expectations of the other person is often where a relationship can break down or it can cement. So I have an expectation that you will behave in a certain way, and you do. That can build up trust within a friendship. So trust and being able to predict how the other person responds is a really, really important ingredient in friendship. But probably the most important ingredient in friendship is the exchange of attention. So attention, again, from a Human Givens point of view, attention, giving and receiving quality attention is a basic human need. So if you like, a friendship is an opportunity to exchange positive attention with another human being. The same goes for any life form. Whenever you've got a relationship with, a plant, if you're a gardener or if you're an animal lover, you have to actually give the other life form some attention. If you have a plant, you have to water it.
That's such a good analogy, yes.
Yeah, some people will actually talk to their plants. And I believe there's lots of research that if you talk to your plants, they grow better.
Yes, but so also our dog. We were talking before this about our dogs, and of course, if we didn't give them attention and practical things like food and water, they wouldn't survive.
Yes. The relationship will break down between. So we give attention to our animals and our plants, and we also give attention, obviously, to other people. And again, depending on the quality of the attention that we give to other people, our relationship will be healthy. If you have a friendship and you never ever phone the person and you never invite them out or suggest you meet them or anything like that, that relationship is not going to continue. So it is about attention exchange, and it's about the balance of that. Now, obviously, in a friendship, that can ebb and flow, and it should ebb and flow. Is if somebody's going through a rough time, maybe the person who's going through the rough time needs more attention than in another time. And it would go through those, because we all go through rough times. But where you've got a relationship where all of the attention is going one way, and there isn't attention coming the other way, again, that relationship over time is going to break down because one person's needs have not been met. So how we actually develop good, positive relationships is by the exchange of attention, is ensuring that we give time and attention to other people. And I think that's becoming more and more of an issue these days. But that's how humans survive, is through good quality attention. It's emotional nutrition, and we need it. We need it.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So in there, you've actually incorporated the next question there, which was how can we create positive friendships? But what I was hearing you say there, if I'm correct, is that there are these sort of three different types, as Aristotle said, of levels
Mm.
of friendship. But we kind of need all three, don't we? It's not
Oh,
to say that one is less important than the other.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, we
yeah.
do. But it's important to understand, the basis, the expectations you have. If you have if you have a friendship based on utility, and you phone someone because you want to have a game of golf with them because they're a golfer, expecting that to be a really deep relationship, having an expectation that that person is going to really, be there for you when you're in trouble, your expectation may not be met. So
Yes.
having an understanding of the type of relationship you have with the various different people in your life and what you can realistically expect from that person helps you to, to be more aware of your friendships and to have more realistic expectations of your friendships. And as I say, your squash partner may not be the person that you go to in your time of need. They may not be able to meet that need in you at all, because all they're really interested in is how well you play your squash.
Yes, of course. And of course, there has to be a balance thereof, as you also suggested there, that the person that you think of as the person that you can bare your soul to might
Yeah.
not reciprocate with that. So
Absolutely. And I think that's sometimes where things go wrong, is that you have a friendship based on pleasure, and you go and have a great time together, you have lots of fun together, and then when you go and you look for them in times of need, and they just haven't got the ability to support you in that time, and then we end up feeling very betrayed. But really, it's down to our expectations of the other person was unrealistic. It's to understand that the level of friendship you have with that person is based on having fun. And when there's no fun to be had and you're in times of need, they may disappear.
And this actually also, I'm just thinking as you speak, there's something I discussed in the newsletter last week about not relying on one person to give everything in your life. So the person who plays squash may not be the person you can have an in-depth conversation with. But
Absolutely.
it's okay to have an array of friendsps that.
I think it's really important to have an array. I think it's really important to have, like the old phrase says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. To have to recognize that there are many different people in your life who meet many different needs in your life, and that's healthy. That's very healthy. If you put all your eggs in one basket, if you put all your eggs in one basket, and that person decides that they want to immigrate to Australia, it can really leave a huge hole in your life if it's a friendship.
Absolutely.
Or if they, if something unfortunate happens to them. So it is important to have an array of people that meet many needs within you.
Yes. Now, does this differ when we're creating friendships with work colleagues, for instance?
Well, I think it does. I think work colleagues come together to complete a task. So they would fall into that utility level. So depending on the work you do, you meet someone, and your relationship is cooperation to complete some kind of task, whatever your job is, be that nursing, or be that working in an organization, but you're there really to cooperate to get some tasks done. That doesn't mean to say that can't morph into a friendship, a deeper friendship, and it often does. It's often where we develop some of our closest relationships, be it in the university course or in work scenarios, where we really begin to get to understand the character of the person, the integrity of the person, and it often you often do develop into that level of a deep respect for that other individual. And that deep respect often feels like I want to keep that person in my life because I really admire them. So it can morph into that. But work is one of those tricky situations whereby if the work relationship changes, it can often then cause a problem in the friendship. So if you develop a really deep friendship with somebody at work, and they get promoted, so now they're your boss, you've now got a situation of a dual relationship. You have a friendship and a manager subordinate relationship, and that can really make things very confused. Once you have you develop what we call dual relationships, where you've got two different kinds of relationships going on at the same time. And that can cause a problem, because one person sees the other person as a friend, and let's say the manager now has to step into a different role, and they may have to give some kind of critical feedback to what was once their friend. So relationships within work can be tricky that way. People can sometimes manage them, but it is about the expectations. Are you my friend, or are you now my boss? That can cause difficulty, and it causes difficulty in lots of different situations. Once there's a professional relationship and a personal relationship trying to operate at the same time, we see that often. Actually, one place that you can often see that is in work scenarios where families are involved, where
yes, of course.
where a son might take over from a father or something, and the relationship between the father and the son is a father and a son, rather than a manager or a senior manager and a manager that's coming up through the ranks, that somebody's developing into a CEO or something. So
living in a rural community as I do, I see that very poignantly in the farming community, where the father has been the boss and the son or daughter is, being made to do all the basic jobs. And then gradually there's that sort of tipping point, if you like, where it's the son or daughter who becomes the boss.
Yeah.
And so that sort of change in power can be, or who makes the decisions can be very, very difficult.
It can be tricky, because what you're doing is you have a personal relationship and you have a work relationship or a professional relationship at the same time, and one will contaminate the other in a way, and that makes it very difficult, because you'll have different expectations of your boss than you would have of your father, for instance.
Yes.
They're two different things, and it's very tricky. Can you separate them out, and can you say, okay, now you're my boss during work hours, and then in the evening say, now you're my dad, or you're my mom, or whatever. It's tricky. It can be done, but it does take a very high level of self-awareness and of self-discipline and understanding of your own expectations to do it. It can be done, but it is tricky, and it's often fraught.
Now, going back to friendships in general, not to do with work so much, how can we make sure friendships stay positive?
It's very interesting, because really, when it comes to friendships, you're talking about a relationship of two people, and you're only really in control of one, which is yourself. This is it's one of the difficulties with any kind of relationship with another human being. Oftentimes what we do is we focus on, well, the other person needs to do this and everything will be fine, whether that's a spouse or whether it's a work colleague or a friend. The only part of the relationship that you can actually take any responsibility for is your own side of the relationship. It's the work of any kind of self-development or self-awareness, is to really, really look at your input, your behavior in the relationship, and making changes in that. You can't really determine what the other person does. So if a relationship is turning sour, we can certainly look and see, well, what can I do to bring it back on track? Is there something I need to take responsibility for? Do I need to apologize for something? We can do that. But what we can't control is how the other person responds to that.
Yes,
so
it's that.
It's always, yes. I mean, having a relationship or a friendship with someone else is always kind of an act of faith in the other person, an act of trust. You're trusting the other person, but you have no control over the other person, really, at the end of the day. You've no control over their history and their past and their expectations. You've no control over how they might be, how you might be reminding them of somebody in their past, or how they might perceive something as a huge betrayal that you never
Yes,
intended.
they might stop trusting you for some reason that you don't
Absolutely.
actually
So
understand.
the only way you can make sure that a friendship stay positive is to manage your own side of it.
And similarly with this question is phrased as, can a negative friendship ever turn into a positive friendship? And if so, how? But I guess we could ask the question the other way around as well, equally.
Yeah, I mean, most friendship starts off as positive.
Yes, it'd be odd if it started as a negative one. Yes.
Yeah, and turn negative. Something happens, and of course, there's something you can do about it, because it really depends on. It depends on a number of different things. So, for instance, if there's some kind of breakdown of trust or betrayal with that other individual, there's different things that will help you get to a point of being able to put that behind you. If that's the goal that you want to bring this friendship back on track. So one of the things that you need to look at was, whatever the hurt or the betrayal that happened, was it intentional? If you feel that your friend hurt you intentionally or said something intentionally in order to hurt you, it's going to be much more difficult to come back into that friendship. Another thing that you need to look at is, how vulnerable were you at that time? Because again, if somebody said something or did something and you were particularly vulnerable at that time, whereas another time you mightn't have been vulnerable and it might have been water off a duck's back, but if you were very vulnerable, you might take that very much to heart and be very sensitive to it. So you can look and see, well, was the betrayal intentional, and was it done because I was vulnerable at the time? Now that's very difficult to come back from, because it's almost like there's the situation of that phrase of, somebody kicked me when I was down. Now, if it wasn't intentional and you were very vulnerable and very sensitive at the time, maybe it wasn't meant that way. And that's something that can certainly be repaired. And again, how close is the relationship? If the relationship is a particularly close one and there's some kind of relationship, it's going to be more hurtful than if it's not a particularly close one. So if the other person, it really depends on the individual involved and the circumstances, but if the other person can own their side and begin to say, look, I didn't intend that, it was meant as a joke or whatever, if they can begin to apologize and take responsibility for their side, in fact, that very act of taking responsibility for their side in the relationship breakdown can actually deepen a friendship and not just bring it back on track, but make it stronger for the future.
Yes.
So, if, however, because what you've got there is, you've got a situation whereby you can really be honest with another human being, and they can really take your feelings on board, and that can deepen the trust. I can now trust you even more. So can I? In that situation,
with good communication and exposing vulnerabilities and admitting mistakes. Yes,
and admitting mistakes.
And of course, I'm guessing, Sue, this is the sort of thing you'll go into in much more depth in the new course, which is called Improving Relationships, I think, isn't it?
It is indeed. It is indeed.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, and then the other side of it is, if you feel that it was intentional and it was done, you were kicked when you were down, I mean, then obviously you've got to take on board that maybe this friendship is not what you thought it was in the beginning, and begin to,
and there perhaps we come on to the next question. If you find yourself in a negative friendship that doesn't seem to be redeemable, what's the best way to get out of it?
Yeah, if that can happen, whereby your perception of the relationship was one, and as often the case, that illusion about the relationship, you begin to come into that state of disillusionment, which I think is always a very good state to get into, because it means that you're coming out of an illusion more into reality. It really depends on the circumstances, because really, it depends on the circumstances of the relationship. Confrontation can end up being very, very destructive, but so can complete withdrawal without any kind of conversation about why. That can also be destructive and very hurtful to the other person. So you can, with both confrontation and withdrawal, so going into, the fight or the flight in the relationship may not be the best way out. What I would often recommend is there some kind of middle ground that you can go whereby you can express some of what's gone on, but gently, without accusation and without anger, and gently withdraw from the relationship at the same time. So if you can find that middle ground, it probably will work out better in the long run. But sometimes what you need to do, that's why I'm saying it really depends on the relationship. Sometimes confrontation can really work in terms of you get the thing off your chest, you stand up for yourself. And sometimes what you need to do is just completely withdraw from the situation as well and just cut off all contact. You see, that really depends on the scenario.
Yeah, and of course that can be very difficult. Someone who just withdraws from a friendship without any explanation can be very, very difficult for the other friend.
Absolutely.
The other party, not knowing what happened.
Yeah. And as a result, it can, because of the fact that they don't know what happened, it can actually make whatever the conflict was in the first place worse.
Yes, and make them find it harder to trust new friendships, perhaps, in the future. So it can be a very ongoing thing. Yeah.
So if you can go for that middle ground, it's the most positive way out of a negative friendship, if you like. Because I think both the confrontation and the withdrawal can just almost put fuel on the fire and create. Most of us don't really want to create enemies out of people. If the friendship isn't working for you, in some way, taking ownership for your part in it and slowly withdrawing is probably the best way out of it, if you can do that.
Yes. Now, here's a different sort of perspective on friendship. Someone whose friends are bullying them, what should they do about that?
Again, it depends on the scenario. People, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about a negative friendship. Again, is it intentional? Are they trying to make a point? People bully in order to get their needs met. And sometimes people put up with bullying because it's familiar, because they've been bullied in the past or something like that, and they don't actually see the negative consequences of what's happening in that scenario. Again, it depends. Sometimes standing up for yourself to the bully can be a very strong thing to do. It can really help you develop strength and courage and help you build that resilience for the future. Again, it depends on the scenario. Sometimes just backing off is the more sensible thing to do, and actually deciding I don't really want to be friends with these people who are siding with the bully and who's bullying me. So really, really, again, depends on the circumstances. And it depends. It depends on whether the individual has got other friends in their lives that can support.
Yes. That's very key, isn't it? Yes.
Because that's one of the reasons why somebody will stay in, because they're the only friends they have, and they're too vulnerable. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about not putting all your eggs in one basket. Having other friends you can rely on.
Something you said there really resonated, though. Something I hadn't really thought of. That we, in any friendship, we sort of get into a groove. And if that groove is that one person is perceived as, I'm thinking back to school days, perhaps, there's the much prettier, cleverer person with the friend tagging along. And of course, that's very clear at school age, but that can go into adulthood and can be a sort of a rut, if you like, a friendship rut that perhaps there needs to be a rebalancing of at some point.
Yeah, because we've always been in this, if you feel like you're not as good as, or you're not as pretty as, or whatever, you'll get into a pattern of being the second fiddle, if you like, in a relationship, which sounds like what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
You've got the main person, you've got their sidekick, so you become the sidekick all the time to someone, and that's one of the really important things in therapy, is to look and see, is there a pattern here? Yeah. Is there a pattern here going back to school when you hung around with Jane because she was the pretty one, and you got attention through her by being her sidekick, or her second fiddle, or wingman, isn't that what they term it sometimes? Yes. And so because you got your needs met through that kind of a dynamic of a relationship, then that continues. And maybe what might be more useful is to have a friendship where you're not necessarily the wingman anymore.
Yes, there comes a point where you want to grow out of that.
Yeah.
But you maybe can't grow out of it with that same friend.
Yeah.
Maybe needs to.
And you might, where you have a friendship on a different dynamic, where you're both equal, which should be much more useful for you.
So, which brings us neatly on actually to the question of jealousy. Is jealousy common in friendship? And how can you prevent this from destroying that friendship? Perhaps a work colleague got promoted, which we've spoken about, or a friend's getting married or has become pregnant, and that's something you're jealous of.
Oh, jealousy, I always think jealousy gets such bad press, because when we act out of jealousy, oftentimes we are very destructive. But jealousy is a very, very common human emotion. And of course, we can be jealous of that someone is getting something that we would really like. And really, what's really, I think one of the really important things is not to demonize jealousy. It's there from probably the day you were born. That if you have one other sibling, it's a very natural thing that there's a rivalry between siblings to get attention from parents. So it's a very normal, natural thing, and I think it can be used negatively and it can be used positively, like anything. Emotions are neutral. They're neither positive or negative. It's what we do with those emotions that really counts. And of course, jealousy can cause all sorts of destruction in friendships. But how we can utilize jealousy is it can really help to act as a signpost. If I'm really jealous of the fact that you've now got a promotion, or that you've now got a boyfriend, it's a signpost that I really want that. I want a boyfriend. I want a partner. I want a promotion.
Yeah, so use it as an image of what you'd like rather than...
Exactly. It's a signpost. It's just telling you, I would really like this. And rather than then using the jealousy to be destructive towards your friend, if you can use it and say, my friend has got a promotion, I'd really like a promotion, I'd like more responsibility, then you can actually use jealousy in a very, very constructive way to say, well, that's a need. Competence and achievement is a need that has not been met in me. How can I meet that need? How can I take responsibility for my own reactions and my own emotions, and utilize that and ensure that I get my own needs met? So yes, it's common. It's common that it's destructive, but it can be really constructive, and not to demonize it. I really think it's important that we see it as a kind of a signpost.
I really like that way of looking at it, actually. Thank you, Sue. Yes. Here's one that I think we've partially covered, really, but how do you move on from past arguments or disagreements?
We have, I think really past arguments or disagreements, again, if you can really own your side of it, reframe the argument or disagreement that you had, reframe it by really trying to step into the other person's shoes and seeing where they were at that time, and really accept that we're all flawed. What comes to mind, I'll give you an example of a friendship I had whereby my friend many years ago really behaved extremely badly on a holiday we were on, and got extremely stressed. She was going through a lot of stress at the time. She was going through a lot of stress with her work, and she took that out on me by attacking me. And it was one of those really difficult things, because I really had never seen this side of my friend before. But in being able to reframe it, that she was under huge amounts of stress at the time, I really don't think that she meant what she said at the time to me, because I was very aware of how that friendship had evolved, and her respect for me and my respect for her, and being able to reframe it. That it was.
And was that something you managed at the time, or did it take?
It didn't happen overnight, Julia.
No.
It took quite a lot of time for me to reframe it, but also then to really begin to build up trust again, and to be aware that if she is under stress, if she's under severe stress, and I know this woman very well, and she can get very, very stressed when it comes to her security and her work, that she is liable, like any human, to lash out. So it's almost like I got to a point of being able to understand her better and understand how to protect myself better, and to be aware that it's not personal. She would have attacked anybody who was there at that time. It wasn't specifically me. It was anybody who was there at that time. She was there. So
in fact, there's an element of we attack the people who we feel
absolutely
can cope with it best, or are closest to us. Yes.
And we have been able to move beyond that, and to move to a point whereby we can just be friends again, and to be able to kind of have enough tolerance and compassion for the humans to know that we're all flawed, that under enough stress we're all going to behave badly. And can you, within your friendship, can you actually contain that within the friendship, and can you give other people a bit of slack, which I think sometimes we can get very black and white and go, well, I'm not going to put up with that kind of behaviour, and I'm not going to see her ever again, and how dare she. I think a little bit of tolerance and compassion, that we're all flawed, and we, under enough stress, we're all going to behave badly. So if I can actually reframe her bad behaviour and, move past it, maybe she can do the same for me, when inevitably I'm going to get really stressed at some point, and maybe I'm not going to behave the best. And she can forgive me.
And I think it does test the level of a friendship. So something like going on a journey springs to mind, where you're suddenly cooped up in a ship cabin, or a long journey train, or whatever it is, and a friendship that hitherto perhaps you've only ever met for a few hours to play squash, indeed, or for and suddenly you're in this confined space for a long time, and that can really show. But I like what you've said about the perfection and thing. None of us is perfect, and indeed the friendship is never perfect. So it's having that bandwidth, that leeway to make mistakes.
And they're, are they good enough? Like with a partner, are they good enough? I mean,
yes.
There's one mistake, one meltdown, because that's what it was. One meltdown. Is our friendship big enough, and am I big enough to contain that and assume it's not going to happen again? Now, if it keeps happening, it's a completely different thing.
Yes. Now, and that brings on to the next question, actually, Sue. If you keep making the same mistakes, what can you do to change?
Well, one of the things, and that's again all part of the Human Givens approach, and part of what we talk about on that improving relationships day, is looking at the patterns. Is there a pattern here where you keep making the same mistake with friends, where you keep putting up with people who are overly emotional and who are taking all of that anger out on you? Are you keep going into the same pattern? And that's one of the really important aspects of therapy, is to begin to recognize there's a pattern here, and I have a responsibility in that pattern. I keep choosing the same kind of dysfunctional kind of relationships. Yes. And what can I do? It's not about blaming the other person, because that's the first, the first thing we tend to do is, well, that friend is, you know, I'm going to get away from that friend. And then we pick another friend and the same pattern begins to happen. At some point, we need to see that there's something within us that needs to change. And that might be, with one person, is becoming more tolerant, and for somebody else, it might be becoming less tolerant of other people's bad behavior. It really depends. What's the pattern? And when we can see the pattern, we can begin to make changes out of that. But until we see the pattern, we're not going to be able, we just walk straight into it again.
Yeah, so it's that being able to stand back, perhaps with the benefit of a therapist to help, and look at the situation or the situations.
Yeah.
Am I always attracting codependent or narcissistic people, or
Yeah.
do I have to improve my social skills? Am I always playing second fiddle? It's seeing that pattern, isn't it?
It is. It's been able to step into your observing self, as you say, sometimes with the help of a therapist, because sometimes it's just, you're so emotional about it that it's difficult to step into your observing self. Being able to step back and look and see, is there a pattern here? And if there is a pattern, what can I do about it? Again, if there's a pattern, we're all affected by our own patterns and our own pasts. It's not that anybody's to blame or anybody's wrong, or that there's some shame in butted. Because again, if somebody keeps ending up in narcissistic kind of relationships, sometimes people feel great shame in that they've caused it in some way. There's no shame in it. It's okay. So let's look and see, you know, what's happening and how come you're staying in these relationships with these people, and what can we do about it, and how can we help you stand back and recognize that type of person again in the future, recognize the pattern of that person, and maybe decide not to go into a friendship with them in the future and have some more choice about it. That's the work.
So it's back to looking at your needs and how you're getting them met. So it's possible that you're getting a need met in the wrong, in seeking out the wrong sort of relationship.
Absolutely. And the analogy I often use with some of my clients in therapy is, if your need for attention hasn't been met and is your need for attention is very strong because it's not being met, it's like, the analogy I use, it's often like, it's like a really hungry person. And a hungry person will eat the chips out of the bin if you're really starving. Somebody who's not really starving might make a better choice and decide, well, I don't want the chips out of the bin. I prefer a nice salad or something healthier. They can make a choice about it. But somebody who's starving will just, I need food.
Yes.
And it's the same with friendship. If you have no friends in your life, you will accept anybody who give you some kind of attention, because it's like, it's the same as the starving person. They'll take the chips out of the bin. So
and that goes back. I'm again seeing a school playground where, for the lonely child, the bully is better attention than nothing.
Absolutely.
So that can become quite a complex relationship there.
Absolutely.
Because,
At least I'm getting it because really what we know from psychology is the best kind of attention is positive attention, but the worst is no attention at all. So if there's a choice between, if you can't get positive attention, and no attention is so horrendous for children and for adults, for people, we will accept negative attention because it's better than nothing.
Which actually, mentioning loneliness, here's a question that puts a different spin on that. I have a lot of friends, but I still feel lonely. Is this common, and what's going wrong there?
It may be the level of friendship that they have with it. It's difficult to know. It may be the level of friendship, that maybe they don't have an intimate friend.
Yes.
Going back to that whole thing of intimacy, oftentimes we think of intimacy as a partner, but intimacy is really about where you can be totally and utterly yourself. You're accepted, warts and all. So it may be that this person who's asked this question has lots and lots of friends who are maybe there for pleasure or for utility, but when it comes to intimacy, they feel they can't be intimate with any of their existing friends. So yes, it is quite common.
Yes, and as you say, we're not talking physical intimacy here. We're talking about the
emotional
warts and
intimacy.
all, emotional.
Yeah, emotional intimacy. And I think that oftentimes, you see, friendships have to go through various different stages in order to get to that intimacy. And I think sometimes people, through some kind of anxiety or through something in the past, just can't allow themselves go to that level of vulnerability that is required to have an intimate relationship. And
right, so it all stays a bit surface, a bit, the level of playing squash sort of level, and therefore you still feel lonely. Yes.
Yeah, because maybe through something that happened in the past, that they are just so afraid of being hurt, or they were hurt so badly through some relationship in the past, that the anxiety about that happening again, they can't get over that roadblock of it may happen again in the future. So they kind of keep everybody at arm's length in a way.
And of course, the thing we haven't mentioned at all here is the social media aspect of friendships, which is definitely at arm's length, isn't it? So this final question for today, how is social media affecting our friendships?
Well, I think it's giving us a level of attention that is not very satisfying. So it's almost like the level of attention we're getting through social media fools us into thinking we're getting that need for attention met when we're not, in actual fact. So it has all the hallmarks of an addiction, whereby we keep going back to something with the idea that it's going to meet my needs, but it doesn't. It meets them to a certain extent, fools us that it's healthy, but in actual fact can leave us feeling bereft. That it is very similar to the last question. It's like you have that lots of friends, but nobody whereby you really feel that intimate connection. And really, when it comes down to it, human beings need connection with other human beings.
Yes, and it kind of needs to be face to face.
Face to face, and in reality, and in the world, not through a screen.
Yes, and not glossified and airbrushed as a lot of social media can be.
Yeah. And not, only the positive aspects of my life, or, you need to have a relationship with somebody in the round, if you like, all aspects of them.
I often think the sort of social media thing is a bit like, do you remember the Christmas letters we used to get from people, and they were always rather annoying, where this year our family's done this, that and the other, and aren't we wonderful? And that's kind of once a year for Christmas you could have a bit of a laugh at it, but when it's constant through social media, that can really affect how one feels.
That's a very good analogy. It is a very good analogy. Or the postcards you get from people on holidays. We're having a wonderful time.
Yes.
Off in this wonderful place. But in actual fact, when you really look at what's going on, they're all having rows with one another.
Yes.
Can't wait to come home.
That's right. Now, Sue, that's the end of our questions. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No. I think the whole area, the only thing I'd say is the whole area of relationships and friendships is a really, really interesting area. And it's something that people can kind of grapple with and find difficult. But in actual fact, once there's a bit of clarity around expectations and different types of relationships and dual relationships, it can really, really help people clarify what's going on and what they need to do to look after themselves and to nurture the positive relationships and friendships they have in their lives. Because it's not just all about our own needs, it's about actually nurturing the friendships and the groups and finding ourselves really meeting our needs and helping other people meet their needs as well. It's a fascinating area. I find the whole area of relationships absolutely fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And something that's just occurring to me, actually, or has done over the last few years, is when we're young, we're very much sort of led to believe that the pinnacle of friendship is to achieve a full partnership, relationship, marriage, whatever it's called. But actually, as I get older, I realize that the wider the friendship
Mm,
level is so much richer and more rewarding in many ways.
mm, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
And much needed, of course. We can't
Yeah,
rely on one person alone to
no, and
supply everything.
I started off talking about Aristotle's three
Yes.
types of friendship, and I really love that aspect of a friendship based on goodness, of a friendship based on deep respect for another human being and for their integrity. I think it's a wonderful concept,
That's
and I
lovely,
think
isn't
as
it?
we get older, that's what we look for
Yeah.
is that
Yes.
rather than entertainment or
Yes. Or passion. Yes.
yeah.
Well, that's a very good note to end on. The goodness within friendship. Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, yeah.
And Sue, thank you so much. This has been really interesting for me, and I'm sure our discussion day today will prove helpful to many of our listeners, young, old, parents, whatever their different relationships that are going on for them at the moment. And of course, it's important that we teach our children about positive friendships as well. So, listeners, if you'd like to learn more about why relationships between friends, colleagues, family can go wrong, and most importantly, what you can do to improve matters, Sue's one-day course, which is called Improving Relationships at Work, at Home, and in the Community, is coming to London on the 30th of April and the 8th of October, and it's also in Bristol on the 9th of August of this year. Now, you can find all the details on the college website, which is humangivenscollege.com. We hope you've enjoyed listening to our latest Ask the Expert podcast. And if you have, please do share it with anyone you think might find it helpful. Meanwhile, thanks for listening. We hope you have a good day. Bye for now.